Future Design Podcast.
This is Takatoshi Shibayama, and you're listening to the Future Design Podcast. Today, I've got Neal Moore, a top content strategist who has been in the media industry for 20 plus years. He's going to talk about the future of content marketing. So, Neal, thanks for coming on. Let's talk about fake news.
Wow! All right, you're gonna dive straight in. Okay,
yeah, let's talk about fake news and fake content and all that.
What about
shit.
News that I wish was fake?
Yeah,
but
we
it
could
isn't.
talk
It's just
about
scary and true.
Yeah, let's talk about fake news and all that bullshit that's out there in the world. Okay. And how do we control that? How do we know that we can cleanse this stuff up?
Well, we don't know yet. There's some really, really interesting cases going on. People are trying desperately to get Mark Zuckerberg to show up anywhere to answer some questions. And I don't think he can hold out forever. And he'll have to do it. And I do think the social platforms are going to have to take some responsibility. I mean, the sheer amount of effort and energy they put into their marketing products, to target the right guy at the right moment with the right message on the right platform and all that. And yet they can't identify a piece of, inflammatory and clearly fake news. Yeah. I struggle with that. I just don't think it's necessarily in their financial interests to work that out. So I think regulation is going to have to be the single biggest motivator. Right. But on an individual level, I've heard about little things that might work. So, for example, there's a little app or a little plugin you can get to Twitter. I've heard, I haven't tried it, where just before you retweet something, it comes up with a little pop-up that says, "You sure?" Right. And you find once that moment of indignant, self-righteous rage you get when you want to retweet something that's very inflammatory, if someone just gets you just to take one extra second and go, "Are you sure?" Actually, it's proven to have an effect where you go, maybe I don't need to do this. Maybe I don't need to spread this kind of this hate in the world. Right. But what you got to remember is what one side calls hate speech, another side calls truth. Yeah. It's not necessarily truth, but the more you try to silence one party, the more they feel righteous in sharing their point of view louder and more vociferously. So I think we've got to deal with, on the tech side and the regulation, they have a responsibility. On the individual side, I think, people obviously feel like they need to shout about their issue because they feel like they're not being listened to. So we need to stop people spreading it, but we also need to help people who have a point of view that perhaps is unpopular or controversial to be able to speak about it. And I think the concept of no platforming, not letting people speak, turns them into martyrs and sort of adds fuel to the fire. So I think that's a dangerous thing to do, is no platform. Yeah,
but I mean, how do you even go through fact checking that quickly before someone posts something? Or I don't know, it could be several minutes, it could be an hour before posting something, but how do you actually do all the fact checking, right? I mean, it's so hard. Even I've done a lot of company analysis during my time when I was in investment banks and hedge funds, and I go through a lot of internet material believing that most of it's true, right? But I can't fact check every single thing out there. Right. And I'm spending all my time looking at that data and trying to figure out how to construct my story to get where I want to. Right. But but there's going to be millions of fake shit coming out on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And how do they get even algos to figure these things out?
I mean, you mentioned algorithms. I mean, there is a group of people out there saying, individuals should be responsible for fact checking news stories. And I think, well, that's great for individuals who don't have jobs or families and spend all day doing it, but realistically, no. I think if you are someone who has a concern about spreading fake news, then check your sources. Go with sort of well-known and trusted sources that can be sued for libel and sued for slander because they have a business incentive not to lie. Yeah. If you're someone who wants to spread inflammatory news, then nothing's going to stop you. And so that's where we need to stop the news getting to them in the first place. And one of the things to do is to stop calling it news. It's not news, it's opinion, or it's made up. And the second thing is I think there's a sort of two-stage filter. So one is real news that is perhaps not reported in the right way or reports on hearsay. And then there's genuine fake news, which, normally is just so outrageous that there should be a filter that says, hold on a minute, this, use your gut. This doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
But then you've got this weird little twilight zone of, for example, the BBC has been criticised for sort of creating fake moral outrage. So they go, this group of people on Twitter, the Twitterati, were outraged at blah 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 blah, and then you follow that tweet and you realise it's just one guy who set up his account last week and has 12 followers. So that doesn't equal to the entire population of Twitter, which is something like 350 million people being outraged. It's one guy, and that's sort of the manufacturing of outrage, and that's difficult as well. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't have any answers for you, but it's a multi-pronged thing. So I think regulation, and we're seeing that's underway. There's a guy on Twitter, funny enough, called Jason Kint, I follow a lot, who sort of monitors the proceedings on that, and it does seem to be going in the right direction in terms of regulation of the tech platforms. I think individuals that want to be, who don't want to be responsible for spreading this stuff, you can practice just due diligence through not fact-checking everything, but just, does it come from a reliable source, and does your gut say, this sounds credible, or this doesn't. But if you're someone who wants to spread inflammatory news to try and win or curry favor for your side of an argument, nothing's going to stop you.
Yeah.
And hopefully we, I know I don't want to be friends with any of those people, but there's other people who do.
Yeah. Well, everybody actually enjoys this fake news and wants to repost it or retweet it, right? I mean,
it's confirmation bias. Everyone likes to see something which confirms something they were already thinking.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what happens is you suspect, that, I don't know, guns don't kill people, people don't kill people. And if someone posts something to that effect, it sort of justifies your thinking and makes you feel clever.
Yeah.
So you go, yes, look, I was right. I was right all along. Everybody loves to feel like they're right and be proven right. Is that right? There's a lot of argument. I mean, particularly in the current climate, in the last few days, we've had this issue happen. And, I keep coming back to, why does America, more so than any other country, with or without restrictive gun laws, have this? And there's two problems. One is there is a fundamental psychological problem underpinning America. There are a lot of deeply, deeply unhappy people there. Yeah. And also they're able to express that in horrendous ways because of the ease of access to guns. So it's one of the problems of the internet right now is it makes every argument binary. It boils everything down to left or right or wrong. You're either with me or against me. There's no middle ground. Yeah. And so it's either guns or it's mental illness. Well, actually, it's probably a bit of both. And we need to tackle a bit of both. And the irony of the internet is we have this huge web with millions and millions, billions even of nodes and points of view and opinions and blah blah blah, and yet strangely, despite the access to this plurality of opinion, it makes everybody very tribal. Yeah, it boils them down to, I'm this side or that side, I'm Republican or Democrat, left or right, pro or anti, black or white, and that I find very, very strange. Being that,
well, isn't that the sense of well, I guess people want to be attached to something, right? And then, and our modern configurations of society is so dispersed, right? Everybody's kind of living, away from family, and you don't even know what you're attached to. You're not even attached to your local community anymore. You don't know who your neighbors are anymore, especially if you live in an urban society. And the only thing that you can attach to is going on the internet and finding people that has the same opinion to you, and then you latch on to that, right? And I think that's how all these things start to happen. Is everybody's in some way a bit lonely.
Well, so what you're suggesting is that community has gone from something that's location-based to point-of-view-based. So your community used to be people who live near you, and it wasn't based on the idea that you all believe or think the same. So your next-door neighbor might vote one way, you might vote another, but you're neighbors, so you get on. Yeah. Now your neighbor is the person who thinks most like you. Yeah. That is not something I thought about before, but there's probably a lot to it.
But you probably don't even know what your next-door neighbor is thinking about in a political sphere or
didn't
community
used to come
building.
up as much. I don't know why politics has become, or the internet has become, the sort of the modern symposium, I guess, and everyone talks politics. But actually, in our real lives, I'm not sure how much people do talk politics.
Yeah, it depends on culture to culture, right? I'm from a culture in Japan, but nobody talks about politics because nobody likes confrontation, right? They don't want to have their opinions disagreed. and that provoking some kind of argument, right? So everybody stays away from the topics of politics. But I also grew up in the U.S. where everybody wants to talk about politics. They're like, that's a kind of like a common sport that everybody has, right? Let's have an argument.
And in Singapore, there's not too much point in talking about
no,
politics.
No, not at all. You can't even say it.
No, and I have a fabulous life here, so I'm not really in any position to complain.
No, but yeah. So this kind of like separation of people and all that, and how do you round people together these days is like put a radical opinion out there, right? And then see who's on your side and who's not on your side. And then that's how it creates all this like, fake news, because you want, even though it's not even there, you just want to make it create it so that you want to see who's on your side or not. I think that's kind of what's happening.
If you create it and you get a lot of affirmation from it, you feel good. And if you didn't create it, but it affirms something you already believe, you feel good. And as we know, these apps and these platforms have been designed as little dopamine machines, right? So every time you get a little hit, you feel good, and the more hits you get, the better you feel, and it's kind of addictive, like a drug. And,
exactly.
And drugs are generally considered to be a bad thing. So I guess in the same sense, this is a bad thing.
Yeah, but how do we, wind that, or where do we take that from here, right? Because clearly this is a social problem, right? It's not just a content problem or a political problem. It's like a person problem, people problem, right? Are we lonely? Are we getting stupid because we want these dopamine, shots all the time? I mean, what is it that is wrong with us that we can identify and say, okay, let's fix this shit?
Oh man, that's a bigger question than I'm educated or capable of answering. But I find there's a lot of conflict in the discussion. So, for example, one of the things I wonder about is, I see friends posting, about America's gun laws or whatever it is there, and I think, why are you bothered, man? What's it got to do with you? You're like, it's the other side of the world. You don't. It's got nothing to do with you. We're also in each other's business. Yeah. So then I think, well, maybe we should just be concerned about things that are a little closer to home. But then that leads to a certain parochial mindset, where your blinkers are on and you're only looking at your own little world, and that's a different kind of bubble. Yeah. So if you're not in a sort of global libertarian versus whatever bubble, you're in a local bubble of where all you're concerned about is your community and whatever. What's the right level of interest? I don't know. I mean, I find that I have less time for certain topics since I had a kid, because I run my own business, and so these things naturally erode the amount of time and attention I have for certain topics, and keep me grounded. And that my biggest concern these days is, is my daughter healthy and happy and going to school? Is my wife happy? Is my business doing okay? And things like that. And I think that my sphere of attention can only go so far. Yeah. So maybe people just need more to do in their lives. I'm not sure. Maybe that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, having a kid also made me a bit grounded to the local community as well, right? Because you want to know who are the parents or who the kids are playing in the local park, and are they safe, and or who in the neighborhood I can actually make friends with.
Well, having kids, that has its own problems, because apparently there's a bunch of people called the birth strikers, I think, and they're refusing to have children for the environment, which I guess is kind of noble. I mean, we are overpopulated, but I do find having kids. The interesting thing for me has been that I've been here for 10 years in Singapore, right? I'm British. I've been in Singapore for 10 years. I don't have that many local friends, because why the hell do they need a foreign friend? If I was in the UK, I wouldn't be going out looking for Singaporeans to befriend. Right. And my wife's, who is Singaporean Chinese, her friends, I guess, are kind of my, but they're more like acquaintances. Right? They're not. Who are my own personal Singaporean friends? And I don't have many. And then you have a kid. And that really forces you to interact with your local community, because my community before that was the community I knew through work or through the things that I'm interested in. So it's very self-selecting. The school is not. I'm not self-selecting. We've gone to the school that is sort of nearest and has the more of a focus on the arts, which for us is important. And the people who go there are not my choice. Yeah. And so I've been thrown into this mix. Yeah. And you don't like everybody, but I feel like I'm finally starting to make some true Singaporean friends. Yeah. Because our kids have brought us together. Yeah. But if you go out choosing, it's like when people say to me, you have a responsibility to read multiple viewpoints on a story. Why? Why? When before the internet, you bought one newspaper. You didn't buy all the newspapers and try and understand the whole point. You bought one.
And it was more neutral. I think the articles were much more neutral.
That's true, because they weren't chasing clickbait, and you had a different business model. But I think this idea that people need to go and seek out other points of view, I think it's a bit utopian. I'm not sure how realistic it is. I think in terms of expanding my horizons, being incidentally thrown into a new mix of people through my daughter has made me find new points of view without sort of academically going out there looking for them. So I think maybe that's the thing. Get out of your comfort zone. Try and find new people and new experiences to open your worldview, rather than relying on everything coming through Facebook and Google, which is one of the pieces of advice I often give to marketers, to sort of swing a little closer to my knowledge point, which is in the marketing and content marketing world. These days, marketers say they know their customers because they sit behind Google dashboards and Facebook dashboards, and they go, I know what they are because they're points of data, and they've forgotten to go out and talk to people, and talk to your customer and find out, because people aren't perfect data sets, and things might surprise you. Netflix is quite interesting in the way that they splice their data is different. They have these 2,000 taste clusters, and they find odd things, like people who are massively into horror movies are also into baking shows or whatever, right? And they find, people aren't maybe as simple and one-dimensional as their demographic data or their click data might have us believe. And I think you've got to have that combination of qualitative and quantitative. Similarly, if you're only getting your news through the internet and you're not perhaps speaking to people, or watching TV or listening to the radio, or getting a few different mediums to come through, I think the internet does a much more aggressive job at giving you more of what you already want. Whereas when you listen to the radio, you get a bunch of stories, and they might not all be interesting to you, but you do hear them. They do go in. And so you get a broader perspective on the world. In the UK, there's a sort of public intellectual called Stephen Fry. And when BBC 4 was launched, we have these terrestrial TV channels, BBC 1 and 2 were around for a long time. BBC 3 was launched as a youth channel, and BBC 4 was a sort of arts and intellectual channel. It's opera and its plays and things like that. And someone said to Stephen Fry, the public intellectual, said, "You must be delighted with the launch of BBC 4 because, it's all the stuff you like." And he said, "No, it's terrible." He said, "Because if I've got the choice just to watch that all day, I'm going to become so boring and out of touch. At least if I watch the BBC 1, whether I like it or not, I'm forced to watch, in addition to an opera and the play, some football and a soap opera and the news and a quiz show and whatever." He said, "It makes me well-rounded." So I think, coming right back around to the beginning of our discussion, you've got me sort of thinking on the fly here, is this idea that in the age of personalization, where everything can be curated to your specific tastes, you are not exposed in an accidental way to anything else unless you choose it. So I think to some degree we need to be forced to adopt a more balanced nutritional diet, both in the metaphorical sense and the real sense. And the idea of sort of personal responsibility being your responsibility to deal with that, I think is a great idea, but it's been proven time and again that people aren't responsible. Now you get into a very dodgy area. Well, who tells you what you can eat? Who tells you what you can read? I mean, I'm asking more questions than I'm answering. But it's very interesting to explore how far the conversation goes.
I mean, but even for your business, I mean, you now know that there's so many data sets out there, and obviously data is just one side of human beings, right? I mean, we're all constantly evolving. Just because let's say this guy was watching Netflix, watching horror movies and I don't know, chick flicks for like, I don't know, 12 months, doesn't mean that this guy can't evolve and start watching something else, right? So how do you even like, project this person evolvement, right? And then, for you, like, how do you create content so that, they can actually get what they want, but also, like kind of move on, like, evolve with that?
So funnily enough, one of the most effective ways is curiosity. Most people have a degree of curiosity about them. And at its worst, this led to the rise of clickbait. This woman opened up a packet of crisps and you'll never guess what happened next. You go, oh, I'm going to click that. And, the problem with clickbait is the story doesn't deliver on the promise of the headline, right? But as long as the story delivers on the promise, then fine, that works. So, for a lot of people at school, physics is one of the most boring and difficult subjects. And yet we have these superstar sort of physics professors like Brian Cox in the UK and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And there's a Japanese guy as well.
Kaku.
Right? And what they're doing is they're asking big fundamental questions that people are curious, and they're getting people to voluntarily watch physics lectures, essentially. I think that can be done for a lot of topics. Is you can raise a more interesting question that piques curiosity and makes you go, I don't know. That's very odd, you know. And we've seen this work with shows like How It's Made, which was a Nat Geo show, a Discovery Channel
I think
show.
I heard
You know?
that,
And I'm no interest in cars, right? None at all. I've never been interested in cars. They get you from A to B. I'm not that kind of guy. But I remember watching the How Is a Bentley Made, and I was glued to it. It's fascinating. Yeah. Because it's handmade, it's hand stitched, it's a work of absolute craftsmanship. It's beautiful, and it got my curiosity not about cars, but about process and how the process works and who are these craftspeople behind it and stuff like that. So I think maybe we need to be better at piquing people rather than saying you should read more of this or watch more of this or it's your responsibility to find it. Maybe we can entice them in with more interesting questions that will entice people out of their comfort zone. And the way people travel, they go to places they've not been before because they want to have experiences that are new. They want to experience new things and they want to be surprised and delighted and sometimes frustrated, and that becomes a story you tell. Maybe we need to do the same with content.
So what kind of content do you see that's like kind of different from the traditional content creation these days? I mean, I heard of like, viewer content creations, like more, the customers are creating, content for their brands and, hashtag it on Instagram. So, people can see that and maybe you get a little bit of sponsorship or whatever it is. Right. But I mean, how is it evolving these days?
So I work in an area that's known as content marketing. And the idea behind it is that previously brands used to advertise in magazines, on TV, on movies. But nobody actually bought the movie for the ad. No one bought the magazine for the ad. No one went to the cinema to watch the ad. So why are we spending so much time and money and energy in creating things that nobody asked for? Most people kind of don't want. And people actually are actively blocking, whether they're TiVoing TV shows to fast forward through the ads, or they're turning up to the cinema late, or they're deploying ad blockers on their browsers, like
I do that.
650 million people have. Well, thanks to the drop or the barrier to entry to creating and distributing content has dropped because digital technology, we're being filmed here by 3 cameras that are worth, a couple of $1,000s each, whereas before they would be $100,000 each. And that's why we can make all this, right? So the purpose of content marketing is to say, well, instead of making ads and putting on other people's content, what if you just made your own content and then people will come straight to you? You don't need to buy ads from other people. They come to you.
Right.
That suggests that companies need to become media companies. They need to get better at being media companies. And that's where there's a stumbling block, because if you're good at making shampoo, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at making media. If you're good at making shampoo, you're not necessarily good at making ads. That's why you hire an agency.
Exactly.
But an agency is a very expensive way to create, something that you have to put out every day or week or month. So you need to kind of bring it in-house. So you're learning right here, okay? You're not a broadcaster. You told me you're a hedge fund guy.
Yeah.
And here you are presenting your own, TV show and podcast. Right? You're on a journey, and you're good at it now. Right. You'll be great at it in 5 years, and in 5 years you may have a huge following, and you'll be the Joe Rogan of Asia or something. That's the idea. That's why you start, and the risk to starting that is quite low.
That's true.
To do this 20 years ago would have cost you a couple $100,000. Now it's going to cost you a few $1,000s. So I think the idea is to get brands to start thinking about, well, what if I built my own media properties, and then I'd own my audience, I'd own the ad space, I'd own the data, and I'd own an asset that sits on the bottom line. And so ads which get spent and disappear and once that money's spent, you're not getting it back. But content is an asset that you build on and build on and build on, and eventually you find that you own a whole channel, and that has real value. And that value doesn't disappear; it doesn't go away. You retain your audience instead of having to go chasing after them with a new ad campaign every 6 months, which never gets you any further forward. So that's the idea between content marketing. Now, what kind of content? Well, that's the $1 million question.
Right. But you said that Lego had a Lego movie, and then they sell 15% more or 15 million more blocks than they normally would, and they made a shitload of money on the movies. I mean, is that kind of one example of how content creation is changing?
So that's kind of the gold standard. So the irony about the Lego movie is that it actually had nothing to do with marketing. A lot of marketing and PR people get up on stage at conferences and talk about the Lego movie as being a perfect example of content marketing.
Right.
Ironically, it's not.
Right.
Because it didn't come out of the marketing department. What happened is the producer was playing with his kids one day, playing Lego, and he realized that if they could make a mega movie franchise out of a Disney ride, which
Right.
was called Pirates of the Caribbean, couldn't we make the same out of the world's most popular toy, Lego?
Right.
And so he hooked up with his producing partner, and they wrote a treatment, and they pitched it to a studio, and it got very far down the development track before they sort of spoke to Lego.
Right.
And Lego didn't even pay for it.
Yeah,
That's
right,
the
right.
irony.
Yeah.
It was paid for the way
Free ad.
movies are paid for,
Right.
which is studio money, private equity, soft money, gap financing, foreign sales. You know, that's how movies get paid for. Lego was smart. They took a small stake in it, which is smart, but they didn't have to. I mean, so essentially they got this incredible marketing vehicle that they didn't even have to pay for if they didn't want to. It helped them sell 15% more bricks that year, but also it drove an 800% return on investment on the film itself. The film costs
amazing, yeah.
$60 million. It made $500 million in box office
Right.
alone, never mind downloads and Blu-rays and things
Yeah.
like that. So that's the gold standard of
Right.
content marketing, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's not that new. It's old as well. So there is sort of famously the Michelin guides. And, you know, have you ever asked yourself why a tire company makes a restaurant guide? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Well, what they realized was by talking to their customers, most importantly, was that people didn't need to buy tires because they weren't driving very far. So why weren't they driving very far? Well, back in the days before Google Maps in the early 1900s, they didn't know if they left their village or their town if there was going to be anywhere to eat or anywhere
Right.
to stay, or if they were just going to get stuck in the woods when it went dark. So the need from the customer point of view was not for more tires. It was for a way to know. It was a need for confidence that they could keep driving and there'd be
Right.
somewhere to eat and somewhere to stay. That's why it's the
I see.
restaurant and inn guide.
Right. Right.
And so they delivered on that need. And then when you've done all that driving and you need new tires, guess whose marketing collateral is sitting in your glove compartment?
Right.
Michelin. Who else are you going to think of?
Yeah. Right.
So you take out the Michelin guides. Now, again, what they've done is turned it into a revenue center because the Michelin guides are now their own business unit.
Yeah.
You pay $30 for one and you put it in your glove compartment. So you're paying Michelin to put their marketing collateral in your glove compartment,
Right.
$30 a time.
Really.
So this is the end game, right? So that's an older version.
Yeah.
The Lego version's a newer version, and there's
Yeah.
all sorts of new models being developed.
Yeah. And what's like hot topic that you're thinking of these days?
The hot topic. Well, I mean, it all depends on the client and the customer need. But one of my favorite new entrants into content marketing is MailChimp. So MailChimp are the not quite enterprise level email software. Their whole market is SMEs, entrepreneurs, things like that. So they've just launched 7 original series, including a podcast and some video series, and it's all based around the theme of taking that great leap, transforming your life, doing that thing you've always wanted to do. Basically that moment that all entrepreneurs have before they launch a business, you know, where they go, this is it, I'm going to do it. And I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to do it. And they have all these shows. So one is about people in their 50s who decide to start a business for the first time after 30 years in corporate.
Right.
Fascinating. You follow their journeys.
Yeah.
My favorite that I subscribe to is The Jump, which is a podcast with Shirley Manson, who is the lead singer of Garbage, one of my favorite bands. And she interviews musicians about the song that changed their life, the song that convinced them to give it all up and become a musician.
Right.
So you'll have had
okay.
a moment where you decided to give it all up and become a blockchain guy.
Yeah.
And I decided to give it all up and become a content consultant. We all have that moment.
Sure.
And they're just sharing more of those moments to inspire more entrepreneurs
Right.
to take the leap. And when they do, which email provider are they going to choose?
Right.
MailChimp.
Right.
So I think they're a really, really good one. And I one of the things I'm discovering, and this may be a way that we combat the whole fake news thing, is that one, companies are more liable than individuals for their content, so they really can't lie.
Yeah.
But two, and more importantly, is in the branded realm, positivity seems to travel further than negativity. So brands are supposed to put out positive messages. Positive messages travel further.
Yeah.
So perhaps one of the things to combat all this negativity is some of these brands who are also being asked to be more purposeful and meaningful by consumers. Maybe one of the ways they can be that is to be more positive, to deliberately use their voice, their vehicle, their budget to create a bit more positivity in the world.
Right.
And this series about people in their 50s who are having a sort of second chance at life and a second career, bringing in their experience and starting new businesses is just so positive and heartwarming and lovely.
Yeah.
And so I think a bit more of that would be useful in
Right.
the world.
Right. And then go back. You were talking about fake news, but like, how do you, okay, so you have the positive side of like, let's get people like really excited about doing something new or getting excited about a certain brand, but there's been always this negative campaign as well, right? So, you bash the other, rival. And now, through this election manipulation that the supposedly Russian government was doing to get Trump elected, I mean, they don't even have to go outright and then even bash somebody. They could just start doing like negative campaigns under the radar through Facebook or whatever social media platform to screw the other competitor over, right? So like how do you even like I mean, I guess the Russians didn't even get caught for actually doing this, and then how do corporations they're probably not going to get. They're probably going to get away with it as well, right?
I think it works in politics. I don't think it works in the commercial world. Partly because if I come and pitch you a service, what's the better pitch to you? To pitch the really good things that I can do for you, or to come in and start bad mouthing all my competitors? I've never found that pitch to work.
Yeah.
Normally, it betrays a lack of confidence in your own product.
Yeah.
Where if you've got nothing good to sell, you're going around just bad mouthing everybody else.
Yeah.
So I don't think that really works. I mean, brands at the end of the day are trying to sell something, and
Right.
by bad mouthing other people, it doesn't work.
Right.
The other thing is politics. I think affects your quality of life a lot more than your shampoo does. I don't know why I'm picking on shampoo today, but more than your shampoo or a pair of shoes does or whatever. I mean, people do get passionate about certain things. There are real sneakerheads out there who love to talk about shoes, and I'm very into cameras, and there's people who get really passionate on these forums about cameras and whatever. But your choice of camera, your choice of shoes doesn't ultimately dictate whether or not you have a job or whether your kid goes to school or whether you can feed yourself. So I think the level of emotion that a brand solicits is not quite the same. Now, sometimes you have to tell a client that because clients want to believe that consumers are just all they want to do is make content about their brand and be passionate about it and talk about it all day long. And I say, well, you might work in insurance all day and have done every day for the last 30 years of your career, but for most of us, insurance is something we don't want to think about. You might, once a year go through, make sure all your policies are up to date, and then that's it. Yeah. So I think you've got to be realistic about what kind of response you can expect. There's a wonderful, wonderful commentator on the industry called Bob Hoffman, who is very cynical and negative, but does it in a very, very funny way. And I'd recommend his blog. And he talks about, he takes the mickey out of, do I want a relationship with my toilet paper, you pick up a packet of Andrex or something, and on the back it says, tell us your stories of using Andrex on Twitter.com. Toilet paper. No, the toilet paper. I'm not going to waste my time with toilet paper. So I think, brands just need to be realistic about how much they can expect of their consumers' headspace and sort of passion, depending on what they're selling.
Yeah, like there's no point of glorifying toilet paper.
I mean, maybe there's a community out there that are really passionate about toilet paper, or they're using it for something unusual. What you tend to find is people do unusual things with it. So you're unlikely to find someone who's passionate about toilet paper for its sort of main usage. But you might find someone out there who is really into papier-mâché, and they found a brand of toilet paper that just works brilliantly for their papier-mâché. Now, that's the story you want to tell. That's the unusual, surprising, piques your curiosity, and gives you a completely fresh angle and perspective.
Sure.
That's
creates
the story
new demand for that toilet paper as well, right?
Yeah, and potentially creates a new market for it. And I think you do see every now and again, people finding that their products are being used in ways that they never imagined.
Yeah, I mean, I heard about these like hackathons that try to like create new product usage for a product that's already well known for.
I hadn't heard of that, but that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting for a lot of products that are so commoditized that, you think, I don't know, toilet paper, you think of Kleenex or whatever, tissue paper, Kleenex. But like, if you could think of something that Kleenex tissue paper can do other than people blowing nose into it, then, it'll make a new product segment out of it, right? I mean,
completely. And you get a story out of that, right? So the way that process happened, the way it was discovered, and the outcome of it, these are all stories you get to tell, and they're positive and they're upbeat, and I think that's a nice thing.
Yeah, I like to actually start doing those hackathons. Actually, that sounds pretty interesting. I just said it myself, but
no, what a great idea.
Yeah, and so. We went through a lot of stuff, so
I talk fast.
No, it's it's fine. I think I try to think fast as well, but for going to the future and then seeing how content is evolving all the time, and we see every day that people's attention spans are getting shorter. They want to see, like, oh yeah, the other day I was talking to a TEDx curator about how they're crafting their speeches nowadays. And first, they started out with 20 plus minutes, and then they shorted down to 18, and now it's 12, and they're even thinking about making it shorter because people's attention spans are so shorter than before. Like
I fundamentally disagree with you on every conceivable level.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's what I've been told, right? I don't think so, because I could hold a thought more than I could read a book and sit down for like hours reading a book. I mean, my attention span doesn't go away.
The issue is where you're trying to capture that attention. You're trying to capture it on the internet in feed, in Facebook and Instagram, where you scroll in feed.
Yeah.
Yes, there are attention span considerations, but there's a difference between capturing attention and holding attention.
Right.
You have a very brief amount of time to capture attention, but you can hold it potentially infinitely. And the proof is coming from everywhere. So take Netflix, for example. Now, is Netflix famous for sitting down and watching one episode at a time, or for binging?
Yeah, binging.
Binging, right? 3, 5, 10 episodes, a whole series in a weekend,
yeah.
right? If you look at the Marvel movies, every single one of them is pushing 3 hours in duration.
Yeah.
The top 3 movies grossing of all time ever are all over 3 hours in length. Titanic and Avatar and one of the Marvel ones.
That's true. Yeah.
If you look at podcasts, are getting longer.
True.
And there are now 1.5 hour, 2 hour podcasts.
They are.
If you look at books, the New York Times bestseller list, right, for the last decade has been Harry Potter, 7 books, Game of Thrones, 7 books, Hunger Games, 3 books. There's all these sagas. There's tons of them. So I think attention spans are very, very long. But if you want someone's attention span for a long time, you've got to invest in quality and creativity, and that I find is fast becoming the exception, not the rule, because in the age of automation, what's happening is a lot of marketers are creating 100 slightly rubbishy things, throwing them at the internet through programmatic or AI engines, things like that, to try and work out which one of them gets, a couple of % greater engagement than all the others. And then it's honing in on the one. That's the perfect ad. We're just going to use that now.
Yeah, it doesn't work
But I'm
that
like,
way.
but actually, it wasn't that good to start with.
Yeah,
it wasn't that good a thing to start with.
Right.
So all you're doing is getting incremental gains on something that wasn't that good in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think there's a worrying trend of companies doing that. Now, you might say, if you've seen something like The Great Hack, well, it works because they did it with all this messaging against Hillary and stuff like that. But again, that was on a very emotive thing, and they were telling lies. And so I think we got to work a bit harder than that. We got to try a bit harder. Than that.
Then what do you think of why do you think TED is actually shortening their length of their speeches? I mean, I was thinking if one speech is less than 12 minutes, was like that's just like sound bites. Like what kind of real content can you squeeze in 12 minutes? It's just like catchy.
I would look at, I don't know, but I would look at their business model. So previously it was an event-based business model. You held a big event. It was very prestigious. You got some big sponsors who spent lots of money. I remember IBM used to sponsor, Rolex used to sponsor, and whatever. Now they've got thousands of events. And you can't command as much money for each one because we know, way better than me, that economics is based on scarcity. The less you have something, the more it's worth.
Sure.
If you have thousands of these events, they're not worth as much.
Exactly.
So your business model's got to change. Now, whether or not they're pivoting to an advertising-based model or a per video sponsorship model or a programmatic model, I don't know.
No.
But my guess is if they're trying to go for volume over quality, then the easiest way to create more volume is to create lots of short things rather than a few long things. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, because TED has built this extremely credible brand that was based on having, when I first started watching TED, it was Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and Bill Clinton and really world-class speakers. Now I haven't heard of most of the speakers. Now sometimes that's because they are eminent doctors and things like that, and I don't follow that world. But sometimes it's just they are self-appointed sort of thought leaders. Which I guess is something I try to do. I'm a fan of personal branding, but I'm not asking to speak at TED. So I think they've got to be very, very careful about eroding their brand equity by trying to be all things to all people. When actually they have something that so many brands would love, which is great credibility and quality and class.
Yeah. So should we like go for the niche when we're creating content then? It's like
for me,
no size fits. It's like no size fits all, right?
For me, it's always go for the niche, and not just because it's very difficult to find one thing that fits all, but without it being very bland. I mean, Marvel has a huge audience, but it's not bland, and look at the amount of money they spend to reach that audience and you know, engage them and get them off their bums to spend $10 to go and see it, right? You have to spend a lot of money. You have to do something really spectacular.
Yeah.
It's like the circus. You have to bring the circus to town for that to work.
Yeah, otherwise you could just wait for Netflix to show it, right?
Precisely. But I think with the niche thing, it's more about the internet's essentially full. Like, it's got as much content as you'll never get through it all.
Yeah.
It's got something on every subject. The only thing that's new is news, things that are developing every day and matter to our lives.
Yeah.
Other than that, everything's there.
Yeah.
Every shot you can conceive of taking is on there somewhere. Yeah. So if you're going to try and add something new to the internet, I think finding niches is probably the most effective way to do it. It's the only way you can carve out your own little niche, your own area, your original space, and create some noise and attention. And I say this because, for example, cosmetics brands. When I was running content marketing agency Click to View, every quarter we'd have a cosmetics brand phone up and say, you know, can we do some makeup tips videos? And I'd be like, why? Are you worried the internet's running out of makeup tips videos?
There's like 15-year-old
there's not
girls
enough?
doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, and even if we make them for you, what are the chances you're going to beat like Michelle Phan or you know, whoever the big makeup influencer is? Like, just go sponsor her. Like, you'll do way better. So if you're a brand coming to the table, your cosmetics brand, for example, you got to do a lot better than makeup tips. You got to do your marketing strategy has to be a lot better than I'm going to copy that 17-year-old girl. You know, if you got to do better than that. And I think the niche thing and the better thing comes from an innovative approach to content. So hackathons, like you said, that's an innovative and interesting approach. I think the top makeup influencer in the world right now is actually a guy who makes himself look absolutely stunning wearing makeup. And you know, no marketer would ever have come up with it. I don't care. No marketer would ever have come up with that. We're going to sell makeup to girls by getting a guy. But if you think about it, if a guy can make himself utterly beautiful, well, if you're a girl, like it's going to work 10 times better for you, right? I mean, genius. But no one would have thought of that. So either go looking for these unusual people who are already doing it, have a hackathon, or go out and talk to your customer and say, what do you need? Because they don't need makeup tips. They've got them. What do you need as a woman, as a human, as a transgender, you know, woman who perhaps needs help in that way? I mean, what's the niche? What's the unusual thing? What's the real fundamental need out there that you can address? And it's rarely just makeup tips.
Right. And you were touching on like humanitarian stuff before we even started this conversation. You know, where are we going with that in terms of like content creation and like doing social good for this world? Well,
there seems to be a trend that consumers want brands not just to make good products or provide good service. They also want them to do a bit of good in the world. Now, some people call that purposeful marketing. Some people call it meaningful marketing. We acquire things and we want, you know, someone very famously said, I think back in the 50s or something, the 60s, you know, when we buy things, we're not buying the thing, we're buying a better version of ourselves. You know, if I buy a gym membership, it's not because I actually want to go to the gym, it's because I want to look great in my underwear or whatever. You know, if I buy a new watch, it's not because I need to tell the time. It's not why you spend 20 grand on a watch, right? You spend it because you want to appear more sophisticated. You envision a more sophisticated version of you. Now, people want to feel good about themselves and about the world and feel like they're contributing to the world. So they want to buy a product that helps them become part of the solution, not the problem. So, you know, brands are doing that. Now, the problem we've got is that some brands are not doing that authentically.
Right.
So it came out today. I don't know if this has been substantiated. I will say that. But allegedly, McDonald's transitioned from plastic straws to paper straws, which seemed like a good thing. But allegedly, those paper straws are still completely unrecyclable. So load of rubbish.
And you're cutting down more trees.
Right. So it wasn't an authentic, you know, they didn't do their due diligence. It wasn't an authentic thing. So I think this is a good thing. I mean, you know, we're not going to topple capitalism tomorrow, and people like to buy things. But if we can help them buy in a more responsible way, a more purposeful way, a more meaningful way, and there's brands who've done that from day one, like Tom's shoes. You know, you buy one pair, you give a pair away. With the immense power and money at the disposal of some of the world's biggest brands and biggest, you know, the P&Gs and the Unilevers, people who really own huge marketing budgets and have huge influence. Why don't they use that money to do more good? One of my favorite campaigns, I wish I could remember the brand now, I haven't seen it for years, was a brand that took the $1 million or whatever budget they had to make a commercial, and they basically spent 900,000 on humanitarian projects, and then documented it on a phone, turned that into their ad. That's real.
Yeah, totally.
Real purpose. That's really putting your money where your mouth is, not just talking about it.
I mean, a lot of corporates now, they've been doing it for a while now, but the CSR thing is becoming bigger and bigger. And
but you see, I think that might be a problem, because CSR is not core business. It's like a nice to have. It's it stands for corporate social responsibility. Yes. Sometimes it's known as corporate citizenship. Basically, it's what allows you to keep doing business in a country. Right. It's like you can use the people and the resources and the manpower and avoid the tax, but you better give something back. Right. That's what CSR was, right? It's not core to business. Sure. And it's very easy to cut when times are tough. Of course. Yeah. I think real purpose comes from making it core to the business. So whether it be an oil company shifting a massive amount of their R&D into renewables, or it being a car company shifting masses of their R&D into alternative fuel sources, or it being a fashion company that's shifting all of its factories to somewhere where it's going to produce ethically and sustainably and whatever. But really fundamental shifts. And if they're smart, if the brands are smart, they can generate such vast PR and commercial value from doing that. But you've got to get it right, because there are some great journalists out there, thank goodness, love the journalists, who are going to catch you out if you don't. So greenwashing is to be avoided at all costs.
Greenwashing.
That's what they call it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, more and more now, because, AI or, these emerging technologies is going to take over productivity from jobs. Well, and then people will start to be looking for new jobs that are not about enhancing productivity, but like doing something like social good or enhancing human values. And then part of the business mission, it has to be towards doing social good, right? I mean, there's no point of like making plastic straws for this world if it doesn't do social good. And I think more and more the shift for corporate mentality is like, okay, people want associate us with doing social good, and I want people to know that we're doing it, so we need to like show that to them, right? And it can't be like bullshit. Like before, as you said, like CSR was like complete bullshit, right? I mean, because there was like tax incentives to do it and like all these things. And
I think the intention was good, and I've never met anybody who works in CSR that I didn't like immensely. They're usually good-hearted people, but often it's a bit of a token gesture. And I'm happy to be proved wrong on that. But I just think if you make it core to business, it's less likely to be cut, and it's more likely to be sustained. At the end of the day, profit as a motive to keep doing something is unsurpassed. So if we can find a way to do good and make money, then we're going to succeed. Now, some people think those two things are completely opposed. There are examples of how they're not. And I think some of the innovation that we're seeing in the world at the moment is coming from that exact point, trying to get to the crux of those two things, be it in energy or automation or, in the developing world, the innovation in bringing energy to rural communities and stuff like that in a clean way, or getting information into kids' hands and things like that. I think you're seeing people who the new businesses get to start from scratch. They're not trying to reinvent an old industrial model, and I think that's very, very exciting.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of good stuff to say about where the world's going, right? Because it's not full of shit.
Well, it feels that way, though, doesn't it? A lot of the time, and I think that's part of the social media's fault, because the extreme views rise to the surface. But I do think, to be absolutely honest with you, I get terrible anxiety. I really do, and I find that it's fueled a lot by by reading too much of this stuff. And I have to try and focus on the fact that the world, depending on who you believe, but the world is in a better state than it has been in a long time. All right, the doomsday clock is 2 minutes to midnight, but there are more people in education. There's less poverty. There's more opportunity. There's all these metrics seem to be right. You have to remind yourself of that, and if they're not right, then do something about it. Like try and do a bit of good, try and do a bit better. The interesting thing about my new clients in this business, as opposed to my previous business where MNCs were my clients, is I'm working a lot more with founder-led businesses now. Where there's not a huge machinery they're up against to try and change things. They can change things because they want to, and they see the good and the right in it, things like that. And I find that very, very inspiring. I'm not a great leader or manager, right? I would love to build a huge company that that does great good in the world. But I know where my strengths lie. My strengths lie in the storytelling side of things.
Right.
But being in rooms with those leaders and trying to help document what they do and tell the story of what they're doing is as close as I get to doing it. And I'm seeing it's like a new breed of leaders. They're not the corporate raiders that we grew up with in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
They're not the, money's not necessarily the first thing. Money's important for them to keep doing what they're doing, but it's not exclusive to everything else.
Yeah, I hear this a lot. Yeah.
And it's really nice. It's really refreshing.
Yeah,
and one of the problems I find with MNCs is they have huge power and huge resources, but they also have their decision making spread out over so many people that no one person can really make that much of a difference. And everyone's kind of looking around the room for, well, if you go first, then it's like politics, right?
Yeah,
well, if you vote for this, then I'll vote, and then we'll both bring it up in the meeting, and no one can get in any trouble. And it becomes very slow, And these founder-led businesses can just plow ahead and say, we're gonna do some good.
Yeah. And then are you creating like a story out of the founders? Because nowadays, like, whether it's Apple or Microsoft or anything, you don't think about the company. You think about the founder or the leader of that company, right? And that's like that's the face of the company. That's what you want to sell, isn't it?
I've heard that when you approach, and you'll know more about this than me, VCs and investors and things like that, the founder story is very, very, very important.
Yes, exactly.
But you also know that if you want to sell a company or float a company, it's got to be more than the founder. Because if the founder leaves or gets run over by a bus, you want the value to be retained by the brand. So there comes a point where you want to transition the founder story over to be the company story. So Steve Jobs is this groundbreaking, rule-breaking artist almost. He managed to imbue the Apple brand with a lot of that. And some of that was poured into Jonathan Ive, and some of that was poured into Tim Cook. But a lot of it exists in the brand itself. So I think the founder story gets you up and running. Beyond that, as you scale, there's got to be a company story. Working for founders is very inspiring, but not everybody in a company is going to get to work for the founder or work next to them or see them every day. You might be in a satellite office or a remote office, or just join the party late when they've already got their corner office on the penthouse floor. How do you motivate those people? You've got to extend the story out to the brand. And that's, I guess, something that I'm doing for these people at the moment. Just seems to be the mission I'm on at the moment, is to help them transition their story out of them as the vessel into the company as the vessel. And the way to do that is scale and show how other people in your organization and in your vendors and in your partners and your customers also embody those values, whatever they might be. So for one of the people I'm working for is a fashion brand, and the guy's put his money where his mouth is, built a whole new factory in Vietnam, filled it with people, incredible working environment for them, leagues ahead of all the other factories that make clothes around him. And he tries to sell that to other brands. He says, come and make your clothes with me, I'll make them right. And the other brands go, not fussed really. So he then went, well, right, I'm going to make my own brand then. It's very unusual for a factory owner to also make their own brand of clothes. So he made his own brand and whatever. And he's been this sort of pioneering guy. But he's exhausted, and he's trying to do really, really good things, and he can't be everywhere at once, speaking on every stage. So what we're doing is try to sort of say, all right, all this wonderful stuff you've done and these wonderful stories and innovations you've made, and let's try and tell that story across the board. And now I'm realizing that the retailers that stock his clothes are also stocking them because they're ethical and sustainable, and all of their stocks are ethical and sustainable. I've realized that the people that supply his cotton are all organic, entirely pesticide free. I've realized that the polyester is all recycled. It's like, hang on, you're in the middle of this whole ecosystem of people all doing good things. Well, this is way bigger than you, man. Let's tell this whole big story here. And that is how you help scale his story.
Right. And it seems like everybody loves these kind of like good stories, right? And
depends a bit on how you tell them, but
I mean, but like even going beyond that, like let's say the whole world has become moderately ethical and everything is like, organic or recyclable or whatever. Like what's next after that? It's like that
I think we got to get there first. I mean, we've only just had Unpacked, which is the packageless supermarket open in Singapore very, very recently. So I think there's a long way to go. And I think there's experiments. There's always unintended consequences of doing things. There's a great book by Jaron Lanier, who was one of the founders of the internet, one of the sort of forefathers of the internet, and one of the people who came up with the HTML language. And he said, in the 80s, we were all digital utopians.
Yeah.
We only imagined good things coming from the
Yeah.
internet. And he said, and we were so naive, we forgot one very important thing, which is the guy with the biggest computer wins.
Yeah.
He controls the traffic.
Right.
He makes the algorithms, and he or she
Yeah.
wins. So we got to be careful about being utopian and going, we fixed it.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
Right.
Because when you start using unpackaged goods, there will be unintended consequences of that. There'll
Right.
be a health scare because things weren't vacuum sealed and wrapped in 3 layers of packaging or whatever. It's a constant process of trying and innovating. And I think to come right the way back to the beginning of our discussion about fake news, one of the reasons fake news is so attractive is it gives very simple, quick, clean answers to very, very, very complicated problems.
Right.
And I think, and people want that, right? The world is
Yeah.
very complicated.
Yes.
You just want a quick and clean answer. What's the right way to parent? What's the right, should we be in or out of Europe?
Yeah.
Just give me a quick, clean answer. And there isn't one, unfortunately. It's
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah.
And the same goes with all this kind of doing good with your brand. It's not just about, well, we're gonna start selling things without packages. That won't fix every problem. There will be things that evolve from that, but it's a step. And I think one of the keys is, rather than mourning the fact that we haven't got the ultimate solution, the ultimate answer, we never will. Why are we here? God, nobody knows, but we still get up every day. I think you've got to learn to enjoy the process. And this gets a little bit hippie, but it's like mindfulness, right?
Yeah.
If you truly thought, if you dwelled on like, why are we here? What's the meaning of life? You wouldn't get out of bed every day. The point is to enjoy the moments, regardless of whether they have any meaning.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with everything we do. We're never going to be in a perfect state, and we're never going to fix every problem. If you can try and enjoy the wins as they happen and resolve to address the challenges as they happen and just take it one step at a time. I think, you can go to bed every day going, well, I did a little bit of good today.
Yeah.
Didn't solve the whole problem. I did a little bit of good today. And you know what? That's we're going from 0 to 1. That's better than nothing.
Totally.
I think if you aim at going from 0 to 100, there's a few geniuses that manage it and do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
But for most of us, I think it'll depress you because you'll fall so far from the mark.
Yeah, totally.
So better to focus on just trying to, within your small realm of influence, just do a bit of good. Create something. Don't just consume something. Create something. Make something. Do something. Just give someone a nice word. My little golden rule is never send an email in haste.
Yeah.
Write
Wait.
it, get it off your chest, leave it in your drafts. Look at it 24 hours later. Do you need to send it with that attitude?
Yeah.
Most times not.
Yeah.
If you feel the urge to click something out of, just take a moment, take a breath. How am I making the world a better place by screaming at this person online?
No,
You're not.
I just went through the same thing this morning.
Yeah, well, I think if you practice a bit of self-awareness, you'll realize you get to make that decision probably several dozen times a day. A perfect example. Yesterday morning, I was sitting in. I was trying to drive up Temple Road, and there was a guy, and he just stopped his car in the middle of the road, put his, like, you know how they do here? They put the hazard lights on. It's like they think they're invisible.
Yeah.
Like they can just sit in the middle of the road. And he was getting out to get his durian.
Right.
And there was a huge pile up behind him.
Right.
He was just getting his durian, wasn't bothered. People are big, and all these, everyone's brave behind email, and everyone's brave in the front seat of their car,
They
right?
are,
No one's got the balls to actually do anything. They're just beep, beep, beep. And I got out the car, and I was angry, and I thought, no, don't be angry. For whatever reason, this guy stops his car. Maybe he hasn't noticed. I don't know. And I just went up to him and I said, I'm really sorry. There's a bit of a queue back here. Everyone's just trying to get to work. Would you mind moving the car? And he went, oh, yeah, sure. Sorry about that. I could have gone up and screamed bloody murder at him. That wouldn't have helped.
Sure.
It would have lengthened the process because he'd have got all the
Defensive
to me like that. All the other people in their cars are all beeping, disturbing everybody, creating this real tension. And all it took was, hang on a minute, there's a very easy way to resolve this. You go up and you ask him. And I did.
Yeah.
Moved on. But my instinct was to start beeping. My instinct was to get up and shout at him. But you got to just take that breath. Mindfulness. There you go.
Yeah. We all need that in this world, don't we?
I think so. We're all very stressed and busy and stressed out, and just
It only takes a little bit to kind of
have
step
a cup
back.
of tea. Just
chill out.
that's what the British do. Just have a cup of tea.
Yes, I love the British way.
Well, the Japanese, they are pioneers of having a cup of tea and just calming down.
Yes.
Being silent. I was once told on a trip to Japan by I was a former Secretary General of the UN or something, was giving a speech, and he looked out and he said, I was supposed to give a speech all about technology, but he said, I see a lot of white faces in the crowd, and you're all here to do business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some tips on doing business in Japan. And the first tip he gave was the most relevant to me. He said, "You all talk too much." He said, "When you come to Japan, just sit, be quiet, stop pitching. The deal will be done over more than just, if it's the way we assess things in the West is, am I getting the right products at the right price and blah, blah, blah. That's a consideration, but it's not the only consideration in Japan. It's also, can we do business together? Can we be partners?
Trust.
Can we, and that comes from being comfortable enough to have a cup of tea, sit in silence. And I did that. And I told my contact, he was working at NEC, I told my contact I just learned this. And he laughed and he went, yes, that's you. That's fair enough.
It is definitely you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was very wide ranging. Awesome. I don't profess to be an expert on all these things, but,
no, not at all.
But on content,
neither am I.
I am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Future Design Podcast.